Hello, once again, and welcome to our webinar called How to Ship UI with Storybook MCP. Um, I'm Kyle, and with me today is Dominic and Michael. Do you two want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, my name's Dominic. I'm the co-founder here at Chromatic, the company behind Storybook. Really excited to join Kyle here and share some of the things that we've been working on with Storybook MCP. If you have comments and questions, this is what we're here for. Leave them in use the Q&A function of Zoom, or like that's preferred, or drop just a comment in the chat. Michael?
Yeah, I'm the product designer here at. Oh no, we just got another one. I was the only product designer here at Chromatic, working on both Chromatic and Storybook over the last few years. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say here.
You designed a lot of the stuff that we're
Yeah,
seeing.
yeah, almost
How
everything
about
we've seen I've worked
that?
on. So you can either blame or thank me depending on how you feel about them. No hurt feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so yeah, we honestly, I think we have a pretty juicy demo for you today, and so we'll do a short presentation just to kind of set some context, and then majority of the time will be in the demo. And as Dom said, please put your questions in the Q&A widget, um, and then we'll try to make sure those get answered.
Yeah, and
So
if they're relevant to
let's,
the current conversation, we'll just ask them in real time too.
yeah, totally. We'll be demoing an agent in real time, so there'll be plenty of time while we watch the agent work to get through some questions. All
All
right,
right,
let's
let's
kick this
go.
off. All right, so I'm going to demo the Storybook MCP in a bit, but I thought it'd be helpful to compare with a before picture of working with agents, kind of with and without Storybook MCP. And trying to get an agent to reuse your design system components as you build your app or whatever is kind of like asking a taxidermist to stuff a lion who's never seen one. The results are not pretty. And worse than that, or adding insult to injury the whole time they're doing this, where they think they're on the right track, or maybe they think they made a mistake and they're just like overly effusive with being corrected. It's really annoying. So this is what we want. We want to take your existing components, whether they be in your app itself locally or in a design system that you consume, and we want to use those components as you're generating code in your app. That's where we started, just getting the agent to reuse design system components in the app. But we realized we could and we should do more. And how far the agents can go kind of depends on your system structure, which breaks down into two concepts: coverage and validation. So on the coverage side, it tells the agents what to reuse. Um, so that's things like the canonical examples of how to use a component, which are stories in your storybook. Um, the props available, so kind of the API of the component and all the types, any additional documentation you've provided about those components, um, and then the ability for the agent to know like what has test coverage and what doesn't. And that makes it makes the patterns in your code base and in your components predictable for the agent. And when those patterns are missing, it forces the agents to improvise. So once we establish coverage, we need to transform it into machine readable context. And that's what Storybook MCP does, but we'll show and talk about that in a little bit. So it's a really important optimization step that reduces token usage and helps the agent to work faster. So coverage is one side, validation is the other. This tells the agents like what to respect as they work. And so it'll run functional tests, it'll run accessibility tests, it'll kind of kick it back to you for visual verification, and then finally the human sign off. So it generates code, the workflow then results in you kind of signing off, and then it goes around and around and around. And we need that because we're not just building prototypes, we're building production code. And so we do want a human in the loop here. So with both coverage and validation, that's what enables um, good front-end agentic workflows. Coverage provides the patterns. Validation keeps everything on track. So the connective tissue that does provide those things is Storybook MCP. It's the underlying tech that hooks up agents to design systems and tools that enable just solid front-end engineering. So, like I said, just a short presentation today because our demo is pretty meaty. So let me get out of this. Now, so in this demo, I'm going to be pretending that I'm an app developer and I work on this app called Meal Drop, which is like an Uber Eats or Postmates clone where you can go here and you can see there's some restaurants and you can select a restaurant and then maybe order a cheeseburger and then it's got like a checkout flow. So that's the basic gist. And as an app developer, or wait, sorry, before that, so I've got a storybook for my app. This is kind of showing the pages that are available in my app. And I'm also using something called composition. So that's a storybook feature that allows you to kind of embed another storybook inside of your main one. So my main storybook is these pages, and then I have a design system set of components that I'm consuming that has its own storybook, and I've composed it in this one. And so what that does, together with the Storybook MCP, is it's going to take my web app components and then my design system components, and the Storybook MCP is going to grab the component information from both of those and then feed those to the agent. And we'll see that in action as I go through the demo. But it's an important thing to understand about how this all kind of stitches together.
And I'd
Okay.
also add the
Yes.
alternative of having multiple MCP servers that expose um, different sets of data. It can be really tough to manage. So that's the reason why we developed composition and MCP stitching. It's that
Yes.
if you have disparate sources of data, your agent doesn't know which one is going to be the right, which button is the right button amongst like base UI, your specific
Yeah.
customizations and your application.
Yeah, that's a great point. Using composition in the way that I'm going to demo here, that came about by trying this stuff without it and watching the agents get confused. And so we realized we needed a way to provide more structure for the agent, and this is what we landed on.
Hmm.
One other important thing to understand, I don't know if it's kind of, yeah, so this is not a locally running storybook that I've composed here. It is a remote storybook that's published on Chromatic. Um, doesn't have to be Chromatic, but in my case it is. So, so yeah, that's an important detail to understand. And then finally, I've already worked with an agent to develop this plan here. Um, so briefly, what we're going to do is we're going to take um, this view all restaurants button and we're going to replace it with a search field. And then we're going to build out a search results page. And we're just worried about the front end of that. So no backend changes or anything. However, you'll watch the agent, it'll mock data and do everything. It's pretty great. So I've just got like a number of phases and steps here to do those things, but we're just going to kick it off and watch the agent do the work. So let's do that. Looks like I've been doing a lot. Okay. So
Your prompt is do this plan.
that's all it needs. It's got the
Ki-
context of the plan file right there. So
Sure. Kyle, can you tell us why planning is superior versus just like prompting?
well, in this case, I'm doing something fairly sophisticated where I'm adding like an entire feature flow, not just like one singular thing. And so I needed more than just like a sentence or two and a prompt. And a plan allows me to iterate with the agent before any work happens to make sure that that work is actually going to be worthwhile. With a prompt, oftentimes, like it'll take a first stab at it and then you'll reprompt and reprompt and reprompt to get it to do its thing. This is a little more efficient where you can just work together on the plan, which is a lot cheaper and faster, and then let the agent cook on the plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
that was a
So
huge
I
kind of realization for me too. Like, if you don't want to babysit your agent, plan.
so while this is going, I'm going to try to like highlight usage of the MCP server so we can understand what it's doing. So right away, it knew to ask the MCP server, "Hey, how should I write stories well?" Which the MCP server will teach it how to do. MCP server is also going to give it a tool to like look at all the components available in both the app and the design system. And so once it has that kind of list that just has the names and maybe a summary if it's available, then it's going to be like, all right, I need more information on button. And so it pulled up more information on button. So that's all the types. It's the first three stories that are available, which usually for an agent is enough, but if it needs more, it can ask for more. And we did that to conserve token usage. And so these are all calls of looking at the components that it thinks it might need to do this work. So that's what it's doing there. Um, all right, so it's doing phase one. I asked it to create a particular button kind of variant that uses a light green color with white text. And I did that to force an accessibility issue so that we can watch it attempt to fix that as well.
Can you speak a little bit more to the kind of token usage optimizations of splitting up Git documentation? Uh,
Sure. So it's kind of a spectrum. So without any Storybook MCP, what it would actually have to do is go kind of spelunking in your node modules and look at the like raw source code, which is often minified. It is really inefficient, both from a token and a time perspective for the agent to do that. So what Storybook MCP does is we take all the component information that's captured in your storybook. So that's the stories, the prop types, the docs, um, including standalone documentation. Like if you document like design token colors and typography and stuff like that. So we'll take all of that stuff and we put it in this nice, compact, concise JSON format. And then we give the agents tools to inspect the JSON, not all at once, but just what it needs. And so we give it kind of an index overview of everything available to it. And then we give it tools to look at like a kind of first pass detail. And then if it needs even more detail, we give it an additional tool to look at specific stories beyond that. And all of that is we kind of started with a simpler solution and we made it more and more complex as we went and landed at this like nice balance of giving the agents the tools that it needs, but not so much info that it clogs my context window.
exactly. And we had our team used evals, our own evals. So we have Storybook
Hmm.
evals to assess that this is in fact better. The latest benchmarks show 27% reduction in token usage from what Kyle just described versus
Yep.
not having a Storybook MCP at all.
Yep. Okay. So it has started doing some work. So it's got a search input here, a search field. I've honestly never seen it. I've ran this demo like 6 times, making sure that everything would go smoothly, and I've never seen it make a transparent input. That's really funny. Um, okay, search results page. There's what I wanted to see. So we've got a search results. It searches restaurants and menu items. So like it's funny. I've never specified that it should search for burger, and it always does it. I guess it knows that like that's a good thing to get both restaurants and food items to show up. All right, so you can see it's added all of these stories. And then so it's about to run tests. So we give it another tool to run storybook tests, and you can see it kicked them off. And because we're using an MCP server and not skills, there's some back and forth in the channels that we can use. And so it's like a real-time thing. As the tests run, you watch it run in Storybook if you want. And so that allows me to, for instance, like filter this down to see where the interaction tests are failing. And so in this case, it looks like it has some kind of issue with the router. Let's watch the agent fix it. So it's rerunning those tests.
Hey,
Well
it
done,
fixed
agent.
it.
And so since there's no errors anymore, it removed that filter. And now if as it's working, it encounters more errors, we'll see it filter down again. All of these yellow dots are accessibility issues, which it will either fix or point out. So yeah, there's a color contrast accessibility issue. And it says, I'll address that with you at the end. Nice. That's a good workflow, agent. All right, let me try to balance this out a little better. There we go.
And so we're just watching it cook. Storybook is reacting to the code
Totally.
changes uh, that the agent is making and firing off uh, tests or running tests along the way.
All right. We have potential for it to do something pretty cool. I'm hoping it does it. So it identified a heading order violation where like there's a H2 and an H3 and they're in the wrong order. I believe that's on the search results page.
Yeah, click it.
Um, so, oh, maybe it already fixed it.
It's very fast. George asks, did it rerun the storybook tests, or is there a storybook test watcher? Um,
It is
it was,
rerunning it. So let me expand one of these. We gave it the ability to only run tests for certain stories because it knows what it needs to do, and that allows it to work way faster than just running tests indiscriminately. Um, a watch mode would be arguably even better. We need to test that though. It may not be, but we just haven't quite built it yet because honestly, what we have here is pretty good. Just letting the agent rerun it.
and
Yeah, there's
Kieran
a
asks,
handful of questions you might want
yeah,
to jump into on the
let,
Q&A because they're starting to accumulate. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah, let's pause here and answer a bunch of questions. So Kieran
Sure.
asks, is it fixing router issue or in the component code, or is it fixing the storybook tests? Uh, I think it's the component code.
No,
But
I would guess that's a storybook thing actually,
okay,
because it mentioned a memory router and that's all storybook.
got it, got it.
Um,
All right. Let's see. Jen asks, does Storybook MCP reconcile duplications, variations of similar components when feeding in local and remote components?
that's a great question. If I had to guess, it will do what it sees in your local code base. So if you have a button in your local app and you have a button in your design system and your code base uses the local button more, I imagine it'll default to the local button. But that's a great example of where a plan is the right thing because you'll ask it to do the plan, you'll read it, and you'll see it's trying to use the design system button, and you can correct it to say, no, I want to use the local button.
I'd probably
Yeah, you could
add,
even encode that. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in here.
yeah, go
Yeah,
You
ahead.
can even encode that at the agents.md, or if you're using Claude, like some skills level. There's various ways you can encode that to say like,
sure.
hey, if you're going to build some components, if it's in the design system, use that one first. And if it's in
Yeah.
our whatever one, do that second. So you can prioritize it that way. And it's just usually like a one sentence thing.
And I think maybe to answer your question, Jen, on a more technical level, we stitch them together. We don't do any kind of like reconciliation between like two titles that have the same button name.
Yeah,
You want to use your agent and direct your agent to do that. We are not the
that's correct.
we're not we are not your agent.
Well, and we're also not the authority on your projects.
Exactly.
Like we can't possibly know or guess correctly 100% of the time. And so um, agents are super malleable though. Like you can give it instructions and they're pretty good about it.
Annie asks, what sort of context optimizations are coming to Storybook MCP, like tagging stories for LLMs? We're running into a context length issue with our current implementation with some models like Claude Sonnet 4.6 due to their context window size.
So you can exclude components, documentation, or individual stories from the manifest. That's just with a tag like exclamation point manifest. will remove the manifest tag, and then it will no longer be present, and the agent will basically have no knowledge of it. Right
can you
now, that's the only control.
can you tell us what a manifest is? Define
Oh, yeah.
manifest.
Thanks. Um, Honestly, that's probably best shown just
Yeah,
visually.
show it.
Try to. VS Code calls this the simple browser, and it is indeed quite simple. Actually, you know what? Let me show it. Let me show this. So I've got, like I said, a locally running MCP server. And so these are the tools that we exposed to the agent. You haven't actually seen preview stories. I'll demo that in a second, but we saw the get storybook story instructions that teaches stories. We saw list all docs. We saw get documentation. There's also a get documentation for story. I'm not sure why that's not listed there. And then run story tests. But the manifest is here. All right. So this is a debugger view that we made for humans to like improve or optimize the manifest if they wish. Um, the actual thing that the agents see is a raw JSON, which looks something like this. Um, but let's go back to that debugger view. So what this does is, so like here I've got this banner component. It's telling me that it couldn't actually find a component description, which is fine, but it did find these 4 stories. That's not super interesting because there's no prop types. So here, category section, there's some props. Well, very boring props. Uh,
And so a manifest is like an intermediate document that
Here we go.
is what we end up exposing to via the MCP server. And so
Yeah,
you as a developer and as an architect of your system can go and inspect this manifest to see what's in fact in the system, see what is being validated, and see where, we don't have a valid about a valid field, and you can go and fix that to improve your context.
that's right. Um, so this is kind of if the MCP is the connective tissue, this is the knowledge, the like concentrated knowledge that we give the MCP so that it can pass it to the agent in a way that is efficient. Okay, let me go back to the overall storybook. One question is, can the front end be any framework? So while we're still iterating on best practices for this stuff, it is React only. Um, but there's not really much technical limitation for that. And so we should be able to expand it to all of our officially supported frameworks. So that's Web Components, Vue, Angular, um, somewhat quickly. We just really want to like solidify the patterns, especially before we kind of bake them into more.
Cool, Kyle. I think we can continue with the demo, and then we'll have
All right.
another pause and answer more questions.
All right. So I want to focus in on the accessibility violation part. So first off, even though I did not have accessibility checked in my test widget, we tell the agent to care about that, and so it runs the test with accessibility turned on. So that's nice. You don't have to remember to do that. So it found 2 accessibility violations. It found a heading order violation where the H2 and the H3 were in the wrong order on this page. And I believe it just went ahead and fixed that on its own because that doesn't require any input from me. It's wrong. There's a clear way to fix it. So it fixed it. I think, yeah. I really love how VS Code does this, where even though this isn't the final result, it shows me just this diff. So that's what it did. It switched those 2 headings. That's fantastic. Then it also found a color contrast issue. Now, for that, that's kind of subjective, right? Like there's no one definite right way to fix a color contrast issue. And so it asks me at the end, let me skip past this for a second. Oops. So it's like, all right, there's a color contrast issue with the secondary button. I can make it dark text on light green. So that's one fix, is I could use dark text. I can make it a darker green, or I could keep it as is. You're the human, you know best. So I'm going to say Silly me. Just use the primary button. So it actually created this secondary button component in my app. Um, so there it switched it to a primary button. And then, yeah, it'll just remove. And I do have it. I don't want it to just run RM by itself. So go ahead and allow that.
Oh, you don't? You don't just trust the agent to do everything for
I
you?
not quite that much. All right. So I ran the tests, no accessibility violations. And then this is the story preview tool that I mentioned. So I've got this storybook running in a simple browser so I can watch it. And frankly, for the demo, it's just kind of cool. But if I didn't do this and I like wasn't watching it and I just came back at the end to see the end result, it previews, and this is not a screenshot. This is a working story right here in the chat. So if I was working like this style, I don't have to open Storybook. I can just look and interact with it right here. And if I did want to interact with it, it also gives me a link so I can open it up in the browser.
That's so
So
cool.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we worked with VS Code on this feature. So they are the folks on the IDE side pioneering MCP apps. And this is one of the preeminent use cases for MCP apps. It's showing live iframes inside of your chat window to verify that like what the agent just did. So
That's right.
I'm super stoked by it. I tend to use the agent alone often and not with like a side by side window open. So it's super
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah. One other thing I want to point out is because of the way that we report back the test results to the agent, um, it knows accessibility violations that it introduced versus the ones that were already there. And so it fixed the new ones, but it did not fix the ones that were pre-existing. Of course, it could if I prompted it, but um,
What if you prompted it?
I mean,
Would that
yeah,
be
sure.
too
I'd rather not. I want to keep my
okay.
PR focused.
Okay.
I'm a good engineer. All right.
You have a chaos monkey on your shoulder right here.
Yeah. Speaking of PRs, so I think the visual is going to be a little different because I did kind of pre-bake this for the demo. But let's say, okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to open a PR. It's going to look like this. It's going to run through CI and do my checks, which is going to kick off a chromatic build. It's going to look something like this. And then, so like as the agent was working, we saw it. It checked its work as it went. It rechecked its work at the very end. It gave me an opportunity to give some input on subjective things. So it kind of did like a localized everything it could do to check. But that's not good enough. We have to report to teams, we have stakeholders. Like we need kind of a final sign off. And so that's where Chromatic comes in, where it's going to give me, let me just verify the changes here. So I could see, like I said, that was the only time I've ever seen it do a clear input. So it's normally white. Um, so we've got, here's empty. Here's my search results page. No results. I really like how it knew to like grab my like empty state from other pages, and it's pretty cool.
So this is like really
Loading.
a workflow for helping you review
Say
all of
loading is
like
not
the
great.
this is a workflow for helping you review all of like the edge cases that the agent would have produced that
Totally.
are really tough to review locally.
Yeah. So here it added on the search results page, it added a story that clicked a restaurant result and verified that it navigated to the restaurant. So that's why we're seeing this snapshot. Um, Same with a menu item. And then there's the updated homepage on a couple viewports. All right. So I'm just going
And
to batch accept. Oops, I meant to batch accept all of it.
so tell us what's happening when you accept, Kyle.
So when I accept, I am like either as a developer, in this case, I'm kind of blessing my own work, or you can imagine a stakeholder in the project, like say your designer. Um, you give them this link, they're notified if they're part of Chromatic, and then they go in and review it. And once they accept it, then that would then allow me to merge this PR. And when I do that, basically all the work that I just did is validated. Like it is like a known good state. And that allows the agent to then if I was working off of a remote MCP, and I'll get to that in a second, that allows the agent to know that it's working or the agent is always working from a good state of those components.
And that really dovetails to a question that we have in chat here. How does it respond to the growth and change in your library? Is it version aware when using the external amp? Um, I would echo what Kyle is saying. So what we just showed is like a validation pipeline for the agent, and because or for the code that the agent produced. And so as you validate it, accept baseline, so too does the context get updated. So you can be certain, hey, not only is the code good, but it actually meets my specifications visually, and from an accessibility standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's always live, so it's like constantly updating.
Yeah. So you can I mentioned that my design system storybook that I have composed here is hosted on Chromatic, and so because of that, its MCP server is also hosted on Chromatic, and so that's what it's pulling from. And so I can know that everything in here is backed by the validation efforts that are enabled by Chromatic, and so I know that my team has signed off on all of that stuff, and this is all good quality stuff that I can be feeding my agent.
Yep.
It's
And in this
garbage in,
case, like
garbage out, ultimately.
totally. And in this case, like it's anchored to the main branch of this design system repository. Or it can be anchored to any branch, but in this case, it's the main branch, so it's always going
Yeah,
to pull from the latest design system.
that's right. I did see a question somebody asked about how this stuff is set up. So in my VS Code settings, the local MCP is just a /MCP route on your locally running storybook. So that looks like that. And then the composition is this configuration right here. So it's this refs property. And then you give it an ID, a title, if you want, and then the URL. So in this case, like I said, it's hosted on Chromatic. So that's not the MCP server. It's just the storybook itself. And then our MCP server will take care of reconciling all those things and stitching it together. And even without the MCP server, the composition is worthwhile because it allows you to look at the design system storybook. Like I didn't show that, but like I can navigate in and use this storybook. Interesting. There we go. Use this storybook without, like, I don't have to have both running or both open. Okay. How does
I
the
can
MCP
probably
server
field a
work with
couple of these,
custom
but yeah.
indexers?
Yeah.
I don't think we've tested custom indexers with this workflow, but it should work because of the way that the indexer runs on the server. Um, I think it will work. It's a great question. All right.
Okay, so one of the questions that I'm just going to answer this one.
Yeah.
The
Sure.
question is like, hey, it's good for accessibility violations and opinions on how to write stories, but what else is it good for, right? If you have good code architecture, agents can use that, figure out how to build UI. And I think there's caveats to that last sentence, but frankly, that last sentence is the answer I'm going to give you is it's really good at providing context in terms of what components are available and how to use them. If you have documentation with them, how to use them, it's really important to have in your design system or within your library, like this is what this thing should be used for, and this is what this thing should not be used for. Like the same things you might write for a human, but you can be more concise about it. And this serves it in a lot faster, more efficient way than your agent having to like dig through your code architecture, hopefully find the right components, which hopefully, they're all in really predictable names. versus just like having that available to access in a quick list that I can skim through and read up on. So it's really, really efficient at that.
And we have the data just like really
Yeah.
quickly off the top of my head. Like we did a benchmark on a project that had a really good architecture. It was the reshaped design system, and we ran a benchmark with and without the MCP. So uh, with the MCP, we had 27% fewer tokens used. I think 2.76 times faster prompt duration, and let's see, 12% better like code quality. Code quality is defined by it uses the actual components that that are specified and doesn't just make stuff up. And this is a benchmark of like 15 runs. The methodology I can provide that but we continually do these benchmarks to understand, hey, is this actually better than than what you get just by pointing an agent at a directory? And we can confirm that it is in fact um, double digit better.
Yep. There's a question about whether the MCP server includes the MDX docs in the manifest JSON. It does. I did not show that. But yeah, if you have an MDX documentation in your storybook, it will read those. It'll read the source of it. So that is a little bit of a limitation right now. Is it won't like if you're mapping over a value to then display, say, design token colors, it's not able to like parse that logic and get the values. It does have to be explicitly in the source, but otherwise it will read that.
There's like a meta
Uh,
question here around like skills versus MCP that might be worth digging into.
um, Michael, do you mind taking that? I think you're actually a little more
Yeah. Yeah. Where's
knowledgeable
the
there.
question? Which one am I looking at?
It's basically like what is like
Okay.
when would you use this versus skills?
Yeah. So
Which is a good question.
it's all about, right, like where the context is. And I think I answered a couple that are similar, but basically, I go pretty deep on skills and agents. I really, really like skills. For those not aware, skills are like a right now mostly Claude specific thing that are basically markdown files telling you how to do a specific task. So you can put some rails on things. So let's say I wanted to do an accessibility audit, or I wanted to like create a pull request or something that uses my template, like those kind of things. Those are great ways to do it. And the MCP server doesn't really care about that. It's just providing context on what's in your design system or what's in your storybook in a really efficient way. It's providing you some tools in terms of testing and getting really rapid feedback loops. So decreasing that token count and decreasing the amount of time that the AI has to spend like digging through your stuff versus skills are more like, hey, I'm trying to accomplish a task, or I want to guide it a little bit better and say like, hey, anytime you use a button, it has to be a button from our design system, or things like that. You can sort of encode those rules and skills on a per
Hmm.
repo or even an org basis, depending on how you do it. And I think that's where sort of the line is for me is if I'm trying to do a task or put some rails on it for a project, I lean towards skills. I do think there's absolutely a benefit in us providing additional storybook tools. So maybe some pre-made skills or pre-made things to help guide best practices along your organization that you can sort of take it or leave it. Um, but this is still pretty early on. We're still evolving this stuff. So yeah. Anyway, hopefully that answers it ish.
I would add to that and
Yeah.
say, so if you've been keeping up with the discourse, it kind
Yeah.
of seems like MCP is like the old and busted and skills are the new hotness. But I think that's only true in the like most general sense. Like if we were only teaching the agent how to read your components and how to write stories, then
Yep.
okay, sure, maybe skills might be a better architecturally way to do this. And we will explore that without a doubt. We will explore that.
Yes. Yep.
But the testing stuff and being able to go back and forth between the running storybook and the agent, you can't do that with skills. You have to have a running MCP server. And so I don't think we'll ever go all skills versus MCP. I think it's about using the right tool for the right job. And we happen to have a use case where MCP is the right tool, at least for what's available today.
Yep. And likewise, this connects to the question from earlier about like the context getting updated. and versioned and like how does the context get updated? Uh, with the MCP server and having a live server running, your agent is always referencing the live context. So anything that's in your storybook gets exposed to that agent. Versus like a skill, which is a markdown file, you probably have to rebuild that markdown file as you add more things. It's not a really great fit for providing context on demand in real time as you are working.
Yeah. Um, we had a couple questions about the remote MCP server and Chromatic, so I just want to
Mhm.
clarify some things. Um, yeah, I demoed everything hosted on Chromatic, but it does not have to be. I'm going to share a link here soon that'll lead to docs. And in those docs, you'll find instructions for how to build your own MCP server using our tools if that's what you wish. But Chromatic sure makes it easy. It handles all the authentication if you need that. It handles versioning. Yeah. Um, let's see here.
Permalinks, branching, all that stuff.
Yeah. And as far as how to do it, literally as soon as you have, again, it has to be React today. And then if you're using Storybook 10.1, technically, I think, but 10.3 was just released yesterday. Um, so if you're using Storybook 10.1 and newer, 10.3 will do this stuff by default. And then when you publish to Chromatic, you already have an MCP server. You don't even have to do anything. You can, of course, turn that off if you wish. Um, but yeah, it's all automatic.
Chuck
To
Shin asked a
answer,
question.
oh,
Uh,
go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, somebody asked, does it set up in any way affect your snapshot counts on Chromatic? And it's sort of a no and yes. Like as the MCP has like no impact on your actual snapshot count. Like that's totally on you whether to run builds or not, and however your process is. However, in practice, you're gonna like as we've been using this MCP and using a lot more AI tooling, we've found our snapshot counts going up not only mostly because we're just moving a lot faster. We're making a lot more PRs. We're building out actually better stories than like we tended to. Like the AI actually comes up with some really nice test cases that it builds out of stories or example cases. So in that case, yeah, it goes up, but it's not like a programmatic reason for it to
It's
go
like
up. It's just
because
you're
your
moving.
velocity.
You're just moving faster, building better things. Um,
Yep. Um,
Um,
Chuck Shin asks, when you update the design system, do you bring it through Figma MCP? How's your collaboration with designers? Michael, you can probably add to this, but my sense, what we showed here is purely like the storybook workflow, the storybook MCP workflow. Um, there's still a lot of ambiguity around the best way to bring stuff that happens on production. So, like the source of truth that exists for your customers and port it back all the way back to your design tooling. Um, there are a lot of solutions. Figma Console MCP is one, Figma MCP is another, but there isn't like a super well trodden path. But if you want to explore that, TJ Petrie, who was on a webinar just a couple months ago, is probably the person to look to, as is Brad Frost. I know they're writing a book on this stuff. Michael, you probably have a little bit more to add?
yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on your organization setup. Some people have Figma as a source of truth and so on and so forth. So you're probably going to, like, realistically, if you're setting up projects and MCPs, if you haven't already messed with this stuff, you probably realize that you have like an MCP for like, I don't know, maybe GitHub, and you have one for Figma, and you end up having a handful to give your agent context based on the tasks you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And at a high level, I'm just not like particularly happy with some of these workflows yet. Like TJ's really like sort of pushing the boundaries is a great example, but I'm also happy to like chat about any of this stuff. Like on our Discord, hit me up. I'm really looking for ways to better uh, to tackle some of the same things that TJ's already looking at. So like design drift or figuring out sources of truth or figuring out how to keep our documentation up to date or all these things. And it's just gonna I can just right now it's just kind of a mix of a variety of MCPs that are task specific almost, and or APIs and CLIs and all that stuff.
Totally. Jake asks, where's the install link?
Ooh.
ah, Let me
Just
share
post it
the
in
screen
the
again.
the chat.
I've got
Maxton
a nice
asks,
like visual.
oh, cool.
There we go.
I
So
think I
we
just
made a
see your
nice
presenter
landing
notes.
page there, and you can get to our documentation and everything.
Uh,
And this was
Kyle,
all
you,
just
Kyle,
published yesterday.
Kyle, you shared your
What's that?
presenter notes.
I did. Let me try that again. There we go. So it's just /AI on the storybook page.
hmm Maxton, are there any chromatic skills published, or is this in the works? Yeah, it's in the works. We're looking into exposing a lot of Chromatic's API programmatically for agents to look at build statuses, comments, etc. Just hang tight while we build that out for you.
Yeah, so to make that concrete, in the demo I showed, like I made my PR, Chromatic did its run, and then I approved everything. But you can imagine a scenario where a stakeholder was like, "Oh, this loading state should be different. I'm going to deny that." We're building out the workflows so that the agent will see that denial, and if that stakeholder left a comment, it'll be able to read that comment and then ideally fix itself.
Um, Thanks, Cal. Another person asks, can I use the MCP only with the local storybook, or would it be possible to read storybook directly from Chromatic? The contents of a remote storybook directly from Chromatic.
Um, if I understand correctly, yes. So I didn't show that, but instead of running a local MCP server, you can just run a remote MCP server. Um, the catch with that, so there's a pro and a con to that. The pro is that means the project that you're doing your UI generation inside, so in my case, the mail drop app, you don't actually have to be using Storybook. You need Storybook for the component information. So where you're pulling things from needs Storybook, but where you're generating the UI does not require Storybook. And you can use the remote MCP server for that. And so where I had localhost, you can just have a URL and then /MCP. Um, and that's true for the Chromatic one, and it's true for your self-hosted if you build that out. So that's the pro. The con is I showed a demo using all of the MCP features, but a lot of those are only available when you're in a locally running storybook, like writing stories, especially running tests. That only makes sense if you're in a storybook project. And so when you're using a remote MCP, you only get the like component documentation related tools, the ones we saw in the beginning of the flow.
That's spot on.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing again.
Walter asks, does the remote MCP require authentication? You can publish both an authenticated MCP and a lot of organizations that care about security, which is like most businesses, probably want to have your MCP behind an authentication, like sign in, either SSO or OAuth. Um, but you can also publish your MCP publicly too. So, and that's a setting. By default, it just mirrors your project settings in GitHub or your version control service. Justine asks, is there a connection with Figma's MCP? No.
That's not really, I don't think it's really necessary because you can have both MCPs, right? You can have Figma's and the Storybook MCP. I do recommend using TJ's Figma console MCP instead of the Figma one for a lot of reasons, but um, this plays nicely with a bunch of MCPs, so they can both be working in tandem. So
That's
you
right.
could have a workflow that's like, hey, if I update Storybook, then take a look at Figma and try to update things there. I haven't had great success that's reliable with that kind of workflow, but that's the kind of thing you could do.
hmm there's a bunch of questions here around when are we going to get support for other frameworks? Angular, Vue, Svelte,
Yeah,
etc. Can you answer that, Kyle?
sure. So, just to be frank, like React is about 80% of the Storybook user base. And so while we're in this, not experimental, this is production ready, but from a like best practices, workflow, philosophy kind of standpoint, like how this stuff should be used. We're still solidifying that. And so we don't want to like bake that into documentation and start spreading that knowledge until it's really solidified. And so we're sticking with React for now while we're in that phase of this work. But unlike prior features, there's really no technical limitations on being able to do this stuff. So we're hoping to fast follow with support for all of our officially supported renderers. And in fact, um, some of our engineers already have, and community members for that matter, have already built versions of this, rough versions that work with Angular. And then I think there's a web components one out there too.
For sure. There's an off-topic question, which I think is pretty great. How do you ensure design drift doesn't happen over time in large code bases? For us, we're biased. We use Chromatic. That is a visual testing tool. It basically tells you, hey, this thing has changed, and you need to kind of verify that whether it was intentional or not. That allows us to scan tens of thousands of states all at once without having to manually kind of review them.
Just to jump in a little further and like help define this, like design drift, like most of the time folks are talking about like, is my Figma design the same as the code and vice versa, right? Like
Hmm.
it's a large code base, things are shifting over here. How do we ensure it doesn't shift here? And that's again, check out TJ's stuff on LinkedIn. That's like kind of his big focus is addressing that. But frankly, there's not, in my opinion, great solutions out there for it yet. And there's a lot of caveats and technical difficulties and inconsistencies with it. But I think there's a process that this could certainly start to help with. So as you build out skills and workflows with your AI tooling, you could say like, hey, if this changes, flag a designer to make sure that other thing changes in Figma or vice versa, or even do it automatically. So uh, these are starting to help address this issue versus solving it. None of it's like perfect yet.
Um, Robert asks, they're looking at integrating Storybook MCP directly into the Figma two-way MCP workflow, but they're also looking at new agentic native like Figma competitors like Pencil and Paper. Have we looked at Pencil or Paper, Michael?
Yes, yes. I looked at I looked at both pencil and paper, and if I'm being quite frank, there's zero difference between them and Figma other than that their UI is actually worse than Figma by a whole lot. Like if you're actually a human trying to use it. Uh, I think they're cool. I think they're innovative products, but there's not a
Tell
huge
us how you
difference.
really feel.
Really, like I was just not very impressed. Like the biggest difference would be they have like a little chat panel. And other than that, it's sort of like I feel like a vibe coded version of Figma or something. Um,
Word.
I don't think any of them are there yet where we want them to be. From if we're talking like from a designer perspective, it's just like okay.
Yeah. And then there's one more question. David asks, how do you choose models for cost efficient and effective outcomes? Any patterns you've noticed?
I mean, for in my experience, I just use the front end models or the
Hmm.
frontier models. Sorry.
Hmm.
Um, it's it's worth it.
That's what mirrors like what Boris from Cloud Code says too, who created Cloud Code. To sum up what his gist is that even though the frontier models are more expensive, they're more right most of the time, so you end up using fewer tokens in total.
Yeah. I will say Boris might be slightly biased.
Oh no, really? It's like asking Sam Altman, like, "Hey, what do you think about AI?"
Yeah.
All right, Kyle, what's next with this? What?
Great question. Actually, let me pull up just so I don't miss anything. So, as I said, we're exploring skills versus MCP server. We started with an MCP server because when we started this work, skills were just barely a thing. They were not proven out at all. And so we'll be exploring that just to make sure we're doing the best work that we can. One exciting thing. So, as I was working, I had my storybook up and because I have done this demo multiple times, I knew which components and stories it was going to generate, and so it was easy for me to kind of know where to navigate. That's not the case when you're doing something for the first time. And so we're trying to build a like review mode for Storybook so that it'll highlight new and changed stories for you. Possibly even like filter down to only see those things if that's all you care about. And so it's even more straightforward to like watch the agent work. And then especially as you come back, because I worked in the demo in a like fun to watch way, but that's not how agents are actually used, right? Like you put in a plan, you kick it off, and then you go do something else, probably with a different agent. and and then you come back when it lets you know that it's done. And so this will allow you to come back and see only what you need to see and not look at the rest of your storybook. We're also looking into ways of using agents to help set up your storybook in the first place, because we know that that is one of the biggest barriers. It's one of the most consistent pieces of feedback we receive is storybook is just too damn hard to set up, and agents are pretty good at that kind of stuff. And so we'll be exposing some tools to do that. Um, so if you had eagle eyes, you might have seen that the manifest is generated using a tool called React DocGen. There's also React DocGen TypeScript. Those are both just tools to analyze code and especially prop types and get it in a like machine readable format. It's what Storybook uses to generate like the controls table and all those features that we know and love. But neither one is great. React DocGen is fast but not comprehensive. React DocGen TypeScript is the opposite. So we built our own. We call it React Component Meta. It's built on the Volar tool, which is what Vue Component Meta uses under the hood. It is both fast and comprehensive. Like it's literally 10x better in both dimensions. And so we'll have an experimental version of that pretty soon. Um, and then finally, we're still experimenting with workflows and things like that. So like all those questions around Figma MCP and how to work well with that, very on topic. We're looking into that as well.
What if like how do people ask us questions and work with us to on some of the things that you just mentioned?
So I would recommend first checking our RFCs. Does somebody mind throwing a link in the chat?
Yep.
So that's a request for comment in our GitHub organization. Um, that's where the most focused feedback is appreciated. And then we have a Discord as well, where it's more like a community freeform chat. But honestly, probably the best place to get your answer quickly is we do a bi-weekly webinar.
Yep. And on the Chromatic side, we're also looking at exposing more of the tooling from Chromatic to agents so that they can move forward in an async way without you
Yeah,
having to um, review all the time.
yeah. Um, I did see, um, oh, where was it? Do we have, how should our agent avoid high usage of visual testing? So that's something we're acutely aware of. We are not just going to give agents the tools to indiscriminately take visual snapshots. Like that will always be tied to the PR itself. Like that'll follow traditional workflows. Now you might be creating more PRs because the agent can work faster, um, but we're not just going to let the agent make snapshots on its own. We realize that's a recipe for disaster.
Yep. Cool. Kyle, I think we covered a lot today. For folks that have follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky. You can DM us. We are in Discord as well, GitHub discussions, all
Yeah.
the normal places. Um,
Yeah. Oh, just real quick,
recording
Dom.
of yeah, go
I
ahead.
do see how do we sign up for the webinar? So we put them on everything that he just mentioned. We announce them there. And then if you're on our newsletter, we also send invitations to that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that wraps us for today. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone for coming. Really appreciate
Yeah. Thanks for
your
your
time.
great questions, your excitement. It was a fun time.